Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Reality Show, brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the philosophy of objectivism to current events or to anything we want to. I have a great panel here with me today. Many folks you're very familiar with Marco, Richard, Jonathan Honig, Thomas Bisson. Great to see you guys. Today, we are going to deal with three topics as usual. The first one is an article from Daniel Hannan, who wrote about an article concerning support for Russia and how the West is driven by anti-Westernism and post-colonial sentiment. What do you think of this anti-Western sentiment inside and outside of the West, and particularly surrounding the Ukrainian war? That's going to be a very fruitful topic. Also, topic number two is the Labor Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has promised there will be no form of wealth tax introduced by the Labor Party once they gain power. They're saying there'll be no raise in the income tax, capital gains tax, or property tax. This seems bizarre for the Labor Party. You guys who are over there in the UK are going to have to tell me about this. What does this mean? Is this a case of George Bush Sr.? Is this a read my lips? For anybody who doesn't remember that moment, that was when Bush Sr. broke his commitment to not raise taxes on people just to get elected, and he promptly raised taxes on everybody. And the Zoom CEO has been lambasted for criticizing his own company's product in recent statements from the media. What say you to all of this? So first, guys, let's deal with this Hannan article. I read his book, by the way, on the Anglosphere. I thought it was Jim Brown has joined us. Great to see you, Jim. I read his book on the Anglosphere. It was very informative on the tradition of liberalism in England that was exported to America and how that has changed the world, how unique it is in the world today. Clearly, we're in a different set of times. There's a lot of sentiment aligned against Western civilization. In fact, if you graduate college today and don't have an anti-Western attitude and don't hold the West responsible for every sin that colonizers committed, European colonizers committed, then you are out of touch with reality. So what say you to this recent, most interesting wave of anti-Westernism that he talks about in his article? Marco and Richard, let me start with you. What say you about this?
Well, I think the first point to raise is I always find the term the West very flabby and very hard to identify what it means. It's like when people talk about America, if you meet somebody who talks about America at a party and they say, I hate America, and you have to drill down immediately into what are they talking about? Are they talking about nutty Californian ideas of white patriarchy, or are they talking about capitalism and the chance to go get wealth? Because the two things are utterly different. And the same is true with the West. If you expand it, into the differences between Europe and America are already huge, even before we talk about what that means in relation to the rest of the world. But certainly when it comes to Britain is the queen as a country of beating herself up. And it is written through the culture that you bash Britain at every opportunity, and of course by doing so you're also bashing the qualities of the West. We never talk about how we got rid of slavery. We don't talk about how we achieved peaceful independence across all of the colonies that chose to go independent. And of course we have a culture which promotes the victim. So, of course, there are loads of victims that want to come out of the woodwork and be our victims if we're looking for them.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
A student of objectivism, we are fairly particular about conceptualization. And every time I hear words like imperialism and colonialism, immediately I think anti-concept. If you go to a bunch of savages and give them education, industrialization, civilization, rule of law, suddenly you're a bad guy. But if you spread death and famine and corruption in the name of Marxism, oh, you're a good guy. So you're not like those nasty imperialists. And that really rattles me quite a bit.
So, Jonathan, the world has always been violent. It seems like the Anglosphere has been able to mitigate a lot of that violence through the passage of its civil laws and the concept of rights. So why does it get so much flack? Why does everybody come down on it as if it is the monster in the room?
Well, in America, especially, Mark, and I'm especially bewildered about it. I mean, we've talked about it on the channel before. I was pleased and honored to help publish this Ayn Rand's A New Textbook of Americanism, and where she explicitly talks about what makes America important. And Richard, to your point, the West, just talk about those Western ideals, individualism, capitalism, laissez-faire, etc. And that is so hated now. But the thing it makes me think of is not just Miss Rand's idea of hatred of the good for being the good, i.e. the West is the good, but also this notion of egalitarianism, right? That ideas don't really matter too much. Every country is basically the same. And it's on both sides, I think, of the political spectrum. Like on the right, you have people like, frankly, Donald Trump, who was asked about Putin before the election and was said, he's a killer. And Trump said, you think our country is so innocent? And then, of course, on the left, the ones who say, to your gentleman's point about how, America is guilty, we stole the land from the Indians, or anyone who's not a certain skin color is guilty from birth. So that tribalism pervades both sides, and lost is what makes the West and America really unique. The individualism, the capitalism, the ideas that set this notion apart.
Yeah, the right is now openly against these ideas. If you watch a Prager University video, you'll see that he holds the Enlightenment and individualism as almost solely responsible for the chaos that our country is descending into. Jim, what do you make of this anti-Westernism? I mean, clearly there's a David and Goliath sympathy out there in the left, where they think if you're small and poor, impoverished, you have moral stature. If you're rich and powerful, you have no moral stature, irregardless of what you do. And the small can do anything it wants to the large with moral impunity. Now that seems to be the animus behind this anti-Western concept. Western ideals are very strong, they're very powerful. They make countries very powerful. They make individuals very powerful. People fear that. That's my point of view. What say you? What's going on here?
I probably have too much to say about this. First of all, let me say, Jonathan, the book, The New Text of Americanism, is really good, and it's underrated. And I've given away several copies of it to people, and they're like, wow, I never saw anything so good before. So I'm glad you showed that.
Thank you.
Okay. I do think anti-Western sentiment is spreading among nations. I see it in finance, especially in what we call the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, these emerging markets countries. And I think some of the anti-Western sentiment may be due to just the rise of pro-socialist, pro-collectivist, pro-fascist thinking but I think that's ascending because of the West's, especially America's, default in promoting and defending capitalism. And I think the default altruist ethics take over when we don't do that. So I just want to focus for a minute on the West, and especially America's role in that trend. Now, I respect Daniel Hannan, but he's appearing to me to overlay kind of a purely either-or ideological pattern on this anti-Western kind of tendency. I think he's underplaying many important concrete details in the Ukraine debate. And again, I didn't see the article, so I'm going on the synopsis here. But I think he's mistaking genuine anti-war sentiment for pro-Putin sentiment. Now, first, let me just point out the behavior of the US government and how that has driven other countries away from the capitalist sphere of influence. The USA government, and the West, it does nothing to defend or promote capitalism. It even goes out of its way to undermine capitalism. Look at the anti-energy policies of this and other administrations, and our failure to support property rights, either here or at home or abroad. The US uses the dollar as a political weapon, and we're therefore seen as less trustworthy than ever. For example, last year, the US Treasury basically confiscated $650 billion worth of US Treasuries that were owned by the Russian central bank. But this was money that was a surplus from trade between Russian companies and Western companies. And it was settled in dollars, and then the central banks convert the domestic dollar surplus to local currency. But it was, profits earned by companies. But then now, if you're in
that are nonetheless connected to the Putin regime, oligarchs, probably with monopolies,
yes,
probably
but
people we shouldn't be doing business with in the first place. And that, I think, lends itself to this anti-Western sentiment when they see us separating ourselves from our principles and doing pragmatic things like allying with vicious killers and oligarchs.
That may be, if you want to prove. I don't actually disagree with the idea that a government should prohibit private companies from trading with whoever they want, unless it's a clear threat. It involves a clear threat to American interest or American defense. But just think, if you're Brazil or you're in India and you see this happening, you think the USA could do that to me just as easily as they did it to Russia if they don't like, one of my policies. So the USA is seen as being a capitalist trader until it no longer suits our pragmatic purpose.
Did they seize those? I want to push back just a little bit. Did they seize those assets because Putin was being aggressive?
They seized those assets to try and shut him down. Yes, because he was aggressive.
Okay, so to me, that's different.
And by the way, Mark,
yeah,
this could never happen under a gold standard, because it could not happen. You could not use, if you had honest money, you could not use it as a political weapon. And furthermore, Absolutely. I'll say, every time we've tried these kind of tactics, Castro's dead. Did it get the dictator out of Cuba? Did it get the dictator out of Syria? Did it get the dictator out of Venezuela?
But you know what it did do? You know what it did do?
Dictator out of North Korea?
You know what it did do for at least
and in fact,
for the communists. Well, for the communists, it's given them some fuel because they claim North Korea's in the financial straits it's in, Cuba's in the financial straits it's in, solely because of the sanctions, not because of their economics.
You're arguing that the sanctions are valid. Okay, I'm going to say that's an arguable point. I think it does way more damage than good.
I'm actually making your point. I'm saying that it's actually given the communist sympathizers ammunition, because they can claim with some validity that the reason those countries are in the economic straits they're in is because the United States has refused to do business with them. They're an enormous influencer across the world. That's prohibited trade, and that's made them impoverished, not their ideas. But I want to move on to Thomas. I want to get Thomas's perspective on this. Thomas, what say you?
Could I just finish a point here? I mean, and I'll try to make it brief. The U.S. has the power to do this, at least in the short term, because we have this dollar hegemony. But the question is, does the U.S. have a moral right to, or is money itself privately owned and neutral, and should not be under the control of the government? The USA has been, and the third point really is that the USA has been inconsistent and unreliable in keeping its international promises. The U.S. has several times pledged not to expand NATO any further east, but it's reneged on that pledge. In addition, the USA played a key role in the regime change in Ukraine in 2014. And a lot of people claim that provoked Russia, and I think, of course, it did. Why would you want to provoke that bear if there's nothing you can do about it?
I'm perfectly okay with singling these guys out.
Failure to abide by these Minsk Accords. So other countries see this. I'm just telling you how we undermine our own interests. Other countries see this and they learn not to trust U.S. diplomacy. They fear U.S. military power, but they do not trust us to keep our word. They see us as powerful, but not honorable. Now, there's a whole other thing I could say about anti-Ukraine war sentiment growing within the USA. I am anti the Ukraine war, and we can get into that in a minute if you want to pursue that.
It's a question of not anti-Ukraine war; it's anti-U.S. Right?
I'm against anti-U.S. involvement. So, and I am saying I can see why people conflate our involvement with the Ukraine war with the idea that we are feckless, not honorable, pragmatic, not really hypocritical, not really what we say we are. And so why support the U.S. why not just join the pragmatists?
Okay, this makes sense. Thomas, what do you think about this? It seems that some of the anti-Western sentiment is definitely anchored to some sense of truth. And some of the things that Jim points out is that we have divorced ourselves from our principles. We've acted pragmatically. We've gotten in bed with the wrong people. We've used the fiat currency to manipulate governments, to manipulate other people's worlds in a way that the rest of the world finds unappealing. Certainly that contributes to anti-Western sentiment, but is the anti-Western sentiment healthy? Is it good? Is it really a gut check, or is it something that's neurotic and deadly?
I mean, look, you guys seem a lot more knowledgeable and more passionate on this subject than I happen to be. My only thoughts when reading about this are just quite simple. It seems like a loss of calibration. Like, what are these ideals that we're striving towards? And when you have grown up and lived in a society that is free, that does have private, like you have the ability to own your own stuff and not be forced into situations like that in a communist kind of world, it's easy to fantasize and forget the realities of what you're inviting into your home. I think it was John Quincy Adams that said, I studied war and strategy so my children could study philosophy and history, so their children can study art and literature. I think we've got a bunch of people who have studied a lot of art and literature, romanticized some ideas that are not grounded in reality anymore. That just happens to be my small take.
Jonathan, what say you to that?
Well, I mean, it reminds me of the famous story of Ayn Rand leaving Russia. I think she was 20 or 21 years old. And at the going away party, an old man said to her, clean this up in the comments if I'm wrong, but said to her, the line was something effective, tell them in America that Russia is a cemetery and we are all slowly dying. That line always sticks with me. Obviously Russia wasn't a cemetery, but the ideas, I think, it's my own interpretation, the ideas are really what was, what is kind of plagued that society and still plagues it. I mean, in my mind, Russia is a bad, backward, pre-civilized country. I mean, this is a country that threw a basketball player in jail for a tiny little vape pen for a year, for months. I mean, this is a country that disappears people all the time. This is a country that's led by truly a dictator in a suit, but he's still a dictator. So, we can get into it another time, Jim, but I mean, to me, they don't have any rights. Certainly no rights.
Yes, that's interesting, because I have that very same sense that you cannot claim to be a sovereign country if you do not respect the sovereignty of your own citizens. And folks, anybody out there who who thinks that this stuff with Russia only happened from 1917 on, there's a great book called East minus West equals zero that talks about how behind the times, how brutal that whole culture has been from the beginning. They've always tried to capitalize on Western knowledge. They've always cheated the West when they've gotten that knowledge, and have always been an antagonistic force against the West. So Putin is sort of playing into that traditionalist game now, and I think that's why a lot of Republicans are sort of siding with him. So Jim, even though I agree with you, I think there's of course lots of crazy complications in this Ukrainian war, many of which I don't know. I still have to side with the side that was not aggressive. I still have to take a stand against the aggressor who has no right to claim sovereignty, no right to make any claims on the United Nations, on us all. Tom, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that as well. It's been obviously come to the press recently that that guy who led the defectors against Putin, the Wagner, how he's been dissipating. Where else in the world can someone be active? Everybody knows that Putin has had this man killed. Everybody knows, but it's just acceptable. How is that? And that's the kind of level of understanding and like rationale people are living by. It's just like, oh yeah, this guy has obviously, of course he was going to kill him. He had no other choice.
And
How is
maybe,
that acceptable?
and maybe, Thomas, to swing back to where we started, Mark, about this idea of like, why is the West hated and Russia is revered? Here's a headline from the Daily Mail 6 months ago. AOC and Bernie Sanders group blames the U.S. for Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you get the left blaming the U.S., the West. And then on the right, I just read in Drudge today that Tucker wants an interview with Putin. And, Tucker's saying, well, Russia is more Christian. That's why. So, there's this idealization of these complete despots, which, Thomas, to your point, are, third world backward.
But what Putin shares with the right, I think, is a traditionalist, nationalist perspective. And he's gravitating towards the Christian Orthodox Church now. He wants to revive some vision of the old regime. And people, and this appeals to the right. They now have an ally in the same way that Reagan felt he had an ally with the Mujahideen against the atheistic Soviet Union. It's a very pragmatic alliance. It will not do us any good. I think Vivek Ramaswamy has been promoting that kind of alliance too, to cut off the new enemy, China. But Jim, your comments skirt dangerously close to this border that we're talking about of we were the cause of Russian aggression because we meddled in elections in 2014 and we expanded NATO, which made them paranoid. I'm sorry, the expansion of a free alliance of nations is a threat to no one. It's a threat to no one.
I think that's an unwarranted, I don't agree with that. So first of all, there's no question in my mind that we encourage Putin through various inconsistencies and lack of what I call strength to get on this little adventure. So I would argue that just our energy policy alone encouraged him to make this incursion. But look, here's to me the key point. The mere fact that you're against this war for many reasons, the most basic of which is that it is immoral to commit American blood and treasure, and there will be blood committed eventually if we stay on this road, to a war that does not benefit American interests. Or let's not even be collectivism. How does it benefit my interest? Vladimir Putin, the fact that I'm against this, I loathe this war and I loathe Vladimir Putin. And this is where Daniel Hannan is making a mistake. And this is where the neocons are making a mistake. They're conflating being against this war with sympathy to Vladimir Putin. And nothing could be further from the truth. He is bad. He is evil. He's also, in my opinion, rather impotent when he's bottled up by NATO. And we don't need to invade. We don't need to fight in Ukraine to bottle him up with NATO. But we also don't need to waste more money and waste more blood and prolong a war. And look at what is happening. I do not believe for a minute the what I call propaganda coming out of this war that the Ukrainians are somehow winning. They are getting their asses kicked. These poor Ukrainian conscripts are getting their butts kicked, and Ukrainian citizens are dying. Ukrainians versus Russians are dying at a rate many times the rate of the Russians. And you are not going to dislodge the Russians from there. This is a war that unless we are willing to fight it and defeat this enemy's will to fight, we are not going to win it. This is, and we might blunder into a nuclear exchange and maybe a real disaster. This is, to me, the height of both moral and diplomatic insanity being in this war.
Look, I'm going to
Marco.
Jim, I'm going to quickly mention just a few super chats.
Why is this different from the Vietnam War, the Afghan War, the Iraq War?
Well, let's talk about that in a minute, Jonathan. Let's get to the super chats.
Yeah, well, we got super chats piling up. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. We've got a few topics still to come. Jeff, thank you for your super chat. Nick Bruno, thank you for your super chat. And Bonnie Bertrand, thank you for your super chat. She was curious about some of this discussion and all that. So that keeps us on the air. Thank you, and keep it coming in the subscriptions as well. Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. Marco and Richard, I just wanted to ask you, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation. Jim made some interesting points. What do you think about being anti-war, the Ukrainian war, while at the same time being anti-Putin? Is that possible?
Yes, you can. I mean, let's not forget that Putin wasn't forced into invading Ukraine in 2014 when he took over Crimea, which is the south of Ukraine. Already in 2005, he killed an opponent. I mean, let's not forget that Putin is a former KGB agent, was fairly high ranking up. I think in 2005, he killed a guy who was his opponent here in London by using a nuclear isotope radioactive isotope to murder a guy. A few years later, I think in 2017 or 16, he used Novichok, which is a nerve agent, to kill another guy, again here in Britain. I mean, Putin is certain. And what did the West do in 2014 when Putin invaded Ukraine for the first time? We just appeased. The European Union and Europe as a whole, they were just in bed with Putin because of the energy issue. They were bleeding Putin dry and paying him big bucks for it. And we have just ignored the fact when he just invaded Ukraine. And then a few years later, for months on end, he piles up equipment and people at the border of Ukraine. And people, the West just looks over thinking, oh, he's just there for a picnic, isn't it? Of course he was going to invade, but nobody did anything to stop him. And of course, you can also argue that the great, mighty Russian army has actually been
exposed.
Kept in check.
Yes, yeah.
Kept in check by the little Ukrainians.
And what's disturbing is the number of people that do support Putin for being consistent, for following convictions and turning them into action, for all of the things that contrast with the West, but of course all lead to more force. And they're also disturbingly happy to see force used. People pushed out of windows. The ends justify the means. For many people, and it follows through into how people treat Western culture, whether it's just stop oil or whether it's climate change generally, or there's a confusion between whether your principles are genuine and how to implement them.
And Jim, sorry, Jim often asked the question. Jim often asks the question, why am I reading this news now? Well, let's ask the same question in terms of who's benefiting pushing this anti-Western agenda? The answer is quite obvious. Is the little Xi dictator in China? He's trying to take over a big chunk of the world without using a single bullet. He's trying to get Africa on his side, and the BRICS as a whole. I think most people here in the West are not anti-Western, but there is a layer of media and people. I think Mark was suggesting earlier on in TDO that there is a bigger agenda going on, and that's what's pushing anti-Western.
I agree.
Before we
question about that,
I think we have to sign out of this topic right now, but I want to leave it on a positive note because we've got two other topics to get to before the hour is up. Quickly, in 15 seconds or less, America and West is clearly suffering from a self-esteem crisis. How can we solve it as objectivists? Jonathan, go first.
I mean, Miss Rand has the answers. I mean, actually, I'll quickly just say, I think it's great we all don't agree on this particular topic. People always say, oh, objectivism is a cult. There's always healthy disagreement on this and application. So this is what I think makes it a strong, vibrant community. And I'm always happy to see it. But avail yourself to Miss Rand's work. She started the project. We were able to finish it a few years later, a new textbook of Americanism. She defines the ideas that make America great. It's not the scenery like Tucker says, or it's not the altruism like the left would say. It's the ideas, I believe, like the founders said. So check out that book.
Marco and Richard, what say you? How can we cure the self-esteem crisis that the West seems to be into?
We can stop focusing on attacking our enemies and praising our own virtues. Simple as that.
let's stop being anti-something and let's be for something, i.e. capitalism.
That's very good. Very good. Jim, what say you?
I would say two things: fearlessly and consistently promote and defend the capitalism and capitalist principles from the top down, government down to business. And second, don't assume that patriots who are against this war, don't accuse them of moral equivalence by conflating their own country and culture with that of Putin and Russia.
Very good. Thomas, what say you?
If you look around and you don't like what you see, check your premises.
That's very good. Something Rand always used to say, I love to sign off with that one. Checking your premises is great, but that requires a little bit of introspection, which I don't think many people out there in the public sphere have. Gentlemen, it's been great being with you. I'm going to hand the con over to Jonathan Honig while I go off to a class. It's great being with you guys. Have a great time discussing the rest of the topics. Peace.
Thanks, Mark. And yeah,
Good job, Mark.
Thank you for that. We've got so much more to come. I mean, this is news out of the UK, and we always like to point out we're based in the UK, but we're talking about topics that are relevant to people from all over the world. This is, as they say, ripped from the headlines. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has ruled out any version of a wealth tax on the richest in society should Labour win the next general election. She told the Sunday Telegraph that extra money for public services would have to come from economic growth. And this was seemingly kind of a shock that this is coming from Labour. Is this something to be believed? Is this something to emulate? Is this going to be something kind of like what Mark alluded to, whereas George Bush promised no new taxes and had to went back? So, let's start with Marco and Richard. You guys are out there in the UK. Is this a shock from you? And what do you make of this seemingly low tax perspective and proposal from the Labour Party?
Yeah, Rachel Reeves. She's an MP, and she has a sister who's an MP. Incidentally, she married to our local MP.
She is, and his dad was he was also an MP, and I seem to remember, because Labour's in favour of equality, so was his mum. So yeah.
Well, this kind of family business in Italy has got a name. It's called mafia. Here they call it cronyism. But in the same way, you can't trust what this guy tell you. I mean, let's not forget that this great lady, Rachel Reeves, and the great Labour group at the moment were actually elected in 2019 under a super uber socialist Jeremy Corbyn manifesto. So at the time they were telling you, oh, we're going to tax the rich and we're going to, delist people who doesn't, all the companies who don't agree with the reduction of climate change and all this kind of stuff. And now they're coming out with the, oh, we're going to do whatever it takes. I mean, I can't believe she used the phrase whatever it takes, taken the lamest catchphrase from the lamest guy in the history of economy, Mario Draghi, when he picked the sovereignty crisis in Europe in the long grass by saying whatever it takes. And this woman, in order to get every single vote she can get, she's coming with a carte blanche to pragmatism, whatever it takes. What, a bit of fascism? Or shall we kill a few people in order to?
I mean, I don't know. It sounds like, we're over here in the States, many of us, but if I saw a politician saying, and I'm quoting Miss Reeves now, I don't see the way to prosperity as being through taxation, I would say, oh my God, they have my vote. So, I mean, are you buying this anymore, Thomas? Is there any reason to believe this?
No, because of exactly what she says in the same sentence where, so, okay, yeah, I'm not going to tax the rich, fine. Let's leave that for one moment. And then she goes, any money, extra money for the public sector has to come from economic growth. Well, that's just another fancy way of saying taxes. So it's like a, don't look at this hand, just watch over here. I'm going to dazzle you with some fancy words and get you another way.
Well, it does seem, Jim, like, just the same way that Jimmy Carter in the States seemed to, late in the 70s, kind of have a come to Jesus moment. I mean, there were people in Rand's circle, free market thinkers, Milton Friedman and others who were active in semblance of promoting, free market ideals back then. Could that happen now? I mean, could a labor leader kind of get a little bit of free market medicine and see that if they actually want to produce wealth, that is the only way?
It could happen. I think you make a good point. One thing I'd add is that when these things happen, you rarely know they've happened until after the fact. So, if this is a precursor to some change of sentiment, we probably won't. I'm not smart enough to know if it's, it's there till after the fact. Maybe she's just, does anybody remember something about 8 years ago? It was after the crash. France imposed a severe tax on the wealthy. That didn't go well. They had billionaires moving to Russia to get a better deal, right? So it may be just a pragmatic fact that she knows that the populace or the people have been taxed practically into oblivion. They're already poor from taxing and inflation, and this will go nowhere. And maybe there's a realization there. I don't know.
I actually want to always know that. You gentlemen who live in the UK, are you brought up learning the story about the Rolling Stones leaving the UK because of the excessive taxation and going to France? I mean, is that part of your curriculum when people propose the wealth tax? You say, wait a minute, we tried that on the Stones, and that's why they wrote Exile.
Yeah.
I know that story, but you're never going to hear that story, not in a British school, not anywhere. I mean, the thing you've got to remember about Labour, and this is absolutely crucial to understanding the left in Britain, is that it links together two halves of the electorate. It links together the working class, blue collar North with the champagne socialists of the Southeast and of London. And with these messages, she's talking to the champagne socialists of the Southeast. She's saying, don't worry, I'm not going to charge your houses in London and impose a wealth tax on you. But at the same time, she's doing all sorts of other things that are hidden in the small print, which do involve tax rises. Things like removing the charitable status on private schools, which is essentially going to raise the cost of fees on private schools enormously. Green levies, charging by the road mile, having second homes for your local government tax are likely to be double your first home. All of these sorts of things are little measures which aren't to do with the headlines of what you pay for your income tax, but are definitely not a conversion or a changing of your spots when it comes to not taxing as much. That's definitely not the case. And one other thing just to remember is that we're in tougher economic times than Labour has ever had the chance of taking over before. They've normally received a pretty decent handover from the Conservatives that they've taken over in recent decades. So the legacy was there for them. Now they've got to take over in much tougher times. So they're laying the groundwork for making sure that they don't rock the boat, don't overpromise, and they need to make sure they can survive in government.
And let's not forget how much they were screaming when Liz Truss, during the period she was prime minister, how much they were screaming against her when she announced lower taxation and more liberal policies. I mean, come on, the lepers don't change spots.
The other thing as well, in the UK, you're right. We don't hear about people escaping to escape taxation or, seeking glory. The stories we're brought up on and the ones we're taught a lot is how the British are the greatest at just suffering through. That stiff upper lip, just keep going, is that slogan. Just keep going. That's all it is. Just keep on, that is what you're brought up on. It's just to keep suffering through. Thick skins.
Well, I mean, we need to make that momentum. And, I think for all these gentlemen, when I say part of what we're doing is to keep that momentum going towards deregulation, individualism, moving the culture. I mean, again, I know American history. It's like what got the politicians in the late 70s to deregulate were ideas, were thinkers like Milton Friedman and Rand and many others. So, even what you gentlemen are doing and what the Ayn Rand Center is doing in terms of popularizing some of these ideas on your side of the pond, I think it's how we ultimately get in the culture. Let's go around the horn one more time. Jim, what say you?
I wanted to ask a question from Richard and the other Brits. I believe Richard said that, if I understood that, the working class union types and the champagne sippers that constitute this sort of unholy union, and that's the left.
Yeah.
But in the US, we're seeing a shift to a more populist. In other words, the right is kind of moving to a hybrid populist group, and there's much less of that traditional. The same people who used to be on the left and right are no longer solidly aligned that way. Are you not yet seeing that in the UK, or am I misconstruing something?
I think the electorate is much more fluid than it's ever been. People aren't quite so wedded to how your grandfather used to vote. But that's pragmatism writ large. And that's what can I get today? Never mind what happens as a consequence tomorrow.
Yeah, the tragedy here that the conservatives are actually slipping towards the left. Everything moved left.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's so frustrating is I feel like, as individualists, we used to have, in capitalists, we used to have one seat at the table. There may be a table of 100, we had one seat at the table. I feel like, unfortunately, we don't even politically have a seat at the table in almost anywhere anymore. But the only way to do it is to change the ideas and to have these conversations that get the support of our viewers and our supporters. So we will soldier on, and we'll soldier on with our final topic, which actually concerns exactly the technology we're using, and that is Zoom. Zoom's CEO has been lambasted for criticizing his own company's product in recent statements to the media. He has said basically that, some things you can't do over Zoom. You can't really collaborate effectively over Zoom. Some things need to be done, face to face. Is this true? I mean, there's a big movement to get people back to work now. Is that just employers who said, I bought all this real estate, I want people in it? Is the Zoom CEO kind of being a little foolish when he's putting down his own company's technology? Thomas, let's start with you.
I love that he's doing that. I think it's amazing. It's the sign of a great entrepreneur and businessman to constantly be reevaluating your own product or service. I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I said that I've not sat down on many occasions and pulled everything that I do apart to think, how can I do this better? Where's the gaps? What is the disservice I'm doing? And I think that's what he's doing. And I admire his integrity and his authenticity in doing that. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that. Remember when Netflix was just sending DVDs back and forth?
Yeah.
And at one point, Reed Hastings had to say, Jim, you know what? We're not doing DVDs anymore. We're moving in it. I'm taking this and moving in a new direction. So this guy's got some vision, or maybe it's the wrong move, but is this how a CEO should act?
Well, I mean, he's saying that Zoom's own camaraderie between staffers eroded. And so I think the angle he's taking is that people need to reconnect personally in order to work better and to develop more trust. And therefore, where there's trust, there's ethics, and that's probably the best tool of efficiency is high ethics within a company. So, but I think he's maybe tilting against a windmill here. The market will decide, and the market has spoken big on this. My suspicion is maybe he's leading a kind of a backlash, a kind of a swing of the pendulum in a certain direction. My strong guess is, though, we're never going back to the office like we were before. So if that's what he's after, good luck.
I think he's just being honest, to be honest. He's not doing a Ratner's here. He's not like the jeweler I mentioned on a previous show. He's not slagging off his own products. He's just being honest that his product Zoom is a tool, and used correctly, it works really well. But I mean, if you work in mobile phones, it doesn't mean that you can't use a landline, or you're disrespecting your own product, or it's sacrilege to use anything other than what you've invented or what you promote. You just got to use it in the context of your full working environment. And definitely when it comes to employees and working in the office, you've got two types of employee. You've got the employee that needs supervision, that needs constant checking, and you've got the lone wolf that is an innovator and a hard worker and has a good work ethic. And one can work at home successfully. One needs to be monitored more. Zoom allows people to get together from across the globe, just as we guys are doing now. So, I mean, that should be applauded. But of course, you shouldn't rest on your laurels, and you should drive your company forward to do other stuff.
Yeah, and let's not forget also that there is a bunch of a new cohort of employees that need training from people who have been in the company for a long time. I mean, to be honest, here the issue is that leave the guy alone to run his own company. He knows what to do. What the issue is here, perhaps, is that currently our government is unable to send its own civil servants back to the office. So let's start focus on this kind of stuff instead of telling somebody how to run their own company. You know, we've got all these stakeholders, people with no skin in the game who decide who wants to have a say on how companies run. Well, back off and let the entrepreneur be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I agree with that. And thank you, Ashley Shrugged, who says support capitalism, get your reality check t-shirt. Definitely do that. And check out our website at the Ayn Rand Center UK while they're there and become a monthly subscriber. I mean, I'll just say with this, just to kind of cap up this conversation, is that, you know, it is ultimately, Jim, to your point, we're not going to go back where we were, but it seems like the most effective means is some combination. I mean, you know, the Ayn Rand Institute does in-person meetings and in-person events, and here at the Ayn Rand Center, we do in-person get-togethers and book readings and stuff. That has such great value when you're getting to know philosophy, getting to meet people that maybe we don't get as much over Zoom. But, you know, Marco, to your point, I mean, let these innovators innovate. And Jim, to your point, the market will decide what works best for us all.
Absolutely.
Let's go around the horn one last time. Who wants to start?
I'll have a go. I think one of the things that's being missed here is the essential of meetings itself, and that often meetings are held for meeting's sake, and they're the worst way of running a business. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing that in person in a WeWork office that's got you know, a setup that looks more like a frat common room than an office, or whether you're doing it more in online in a Zoom setting. Because I'm reminded of like Kent Lansing here from the Fountainhead, when he talks about board of directors being full of ballast and full of like nodding dogs and groups of vacuums around the table. And when you see a Zoom meeting, sometimes that's the case. You can just see a lot of nodding dogs, people who are sitting back in the background, who are participating in the meeting, but not adding anything. And that, if you're running a business, is something you need to combat. But it's not the tool you're using, it's how you're managing your company that's important.
Thomas, any final words?
I think Rich has just summed it up beautifully. You know, understand the tool, choose the best tool for the job you want to do, and get to work. Like, stop worrying about what everyone else is doing. Just look to use the best tool you can for the job you want to do.
Jim, enjoyed being with you.
I can't help but think of this.
Say you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to walk on you there. I can't help but think of this through the idea, you know, from my perspective as an investor. This is a very good indicator of the post-COVID economy, I think. There are very many good statistical indicators that show that being away from the office bounced down to a low, and it's come back up now and is sort of leveling off. And you can see this with office occupancy. You can see it with cell phone usage in office areas. You can see it with transportation and usage of transportation in downtown areas. And it's a very similar pattern in all the big cities all over the USA, all over. It's very consistent. So what the question I ask is, how does this different, these different work patterns affect demand patterns? I mean, if we're at home now 50% of the time, we use different stuff, we demand different things, our driving patterns are different, our consumption patterns are different, everything is much different than it was just 3 years ago. And so it's good to think about that in terms of what I think, I'm sorry, I just can't help it. What investment opportunities does that open up? I haven't come to any great conclusions yet, but you know, I need something to keep me awake at night. So there's that.
And isn't that what wealth creation is? You know, when you think about, you can't imagine life before Zoom now. Like, you can't imagine. And that is, people say, oh, well, life has stayed the same for everyone. No, you think about these amazing innovations, Mark and Richard, to your point, that these people come up with that make all of our existence better and allow us to connect with our philosophy posse every day. So, gentlemen, this was really enjoyable. Thank you so much for being part of it and for being part of the reality show. Don't go anywhere, though, if you're one of our viewers, because coming up at 7 p.m. UK, it's the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. You have to be a member. But if this is your first time reading the Fountainhead, or if you've read it, you know, many times, it's so much more enjoyable to read it with James Valiant, read it with an expert. You learn and pick out, and you have that great camaraderie. So it'll also be live streamed if you're a YouTube member. So take this opportunity to become a YouTube member. It's £5 a month, not too much, and you get to support what we're doing here every day with a reality show and the Daily Objective as well. Thank you all for being with us. For Richard and Marco and Jim and Thomas, it's Jonathan Honig thanking you once again. And stay tuned, because we've got the Fountainhead coming up, and we'll be back for the Daily Objective tomorrow. Wishing you best premises, and thanks again. Be well.
Thanks, Jonathan.